In a small village nestled along the edge of a wide, glimmering river, there lived a young African girl whose presence seemed to carry a gentle light wherever she went. The villagers often spoke of her kindness, for she would always offer help to those in need, whether it was assisting elders with their chores, guiding children safely along the riverbanks, or tending to the sick with herbs and tender care. Her laughter, soft and musical, seemed to soothe even the most troubled hearts, and her eyes, dark and luminous, held a quiet wisdom far beyond her years. It was said that she could hear the whispers of the wind and understand the subtle language of the water, for she had been born under a full moon on the night the river glowed silver, a sign many believed marked her as special. Her home was modest, a small hut with a thatched roof, surrounded by wildflowers and the gentle murmur of the river. She would spend hours walking along the banks, dipping her fingers into the water, feeling its cool embrace, and listening to the currents as if they spoke directly to her. To the villagers, she was more than a simple girl. She was someone connected to the sacred river that ran like a lifeline through their land. The elders whispered that the river was home to ancient spirits, protectors of the people, and that this girl was their chosen listener, their intermediary between the spiritual world and the mortal one. Every morning she would rise before the sun, her bare feet brushing against the dew-kissed grass, and make her way to the river to greet it. She would murmur blessings over the water, offering gratitude for its bounty, and in return she felt a warmth and energy flow through her, as if the river recognized her reverence and responded in kind. Fish would swim close to the banks as she reached out her hands, and birds would sing louder as if in celebration of her presence. Even the trees, bending gently over the river, seemed to sway toward her as she walked by. Her intuition was remarkable. She could sense the subtle shifts in the water's current, predicting when storms approached or when the river would rise too high. Villagers often sought her advice about fishing, planting crops, or preparing for the seasonal floods. Though she never demanded attention or praise, her guidance was trusted, and many followed her insights with unwavering faith. Children would follow her on her morning walks, listening intently as she taught them the songs of the river, the secret rhythms of the waves, and the lessons she had learned from the spirits. She taught them to respect the land, the water, and all living things, planting in their hearts a reverence that would last their lifetimes. Despite her growing influence, she remained humble. She never boasted of her abilities, and she never allowed anyone to feel small in her presence. The villagers admired her not only for her spiritual gifts but for the grace with which she carried them. Her reputation as a bridge between the mortal and the spiritual made some envious, though she remained unaware of the subtle undercurrents of jealousy that rippled through the village. People whispered about her beauty, her wisdom, and the ease with which the river seemed to obey her. Some said she had been kissed by the spirits themselves, and though the girl did not speak of such things, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that reflected her inner strength. The river itself seemed alive in her presence, a force that could be both gentle and formidable. She would sometimes wander into the shallows and close her eyes, feeling the currents twist around her ankles, whispering secrets in a language only she could understand. She knew when the water held danger and when it carried blessings. On certain nights, when the moonlight shimmered across its surface, she claimed to see shapes moving beneath the waves, spirits of the river, guardians who had watched over her since birth. She never feared them, for she trusted in their protection and felt an unspoken bond that gave her both comfort and power. Her family, though poor, respected her deeply. They often marveled at her connection to the river and the ease with which she seemed to navigate both the earthly and spiritual worlds. Neighbors would come seeking her counsel, bringing gifts of food or small tokens of appreciation. Yet, she accepted nothing with arrogance, always redirecting praise to the river and its spirits, emphasizing that the source of her guidance was not herself but the sacred water that flowed endlessly, carrying life, wisdom, and protection. Even at a young age, she displayed courage. If she sensed danger approaching the river or the village, she would act swiftly, warning others and leading them to safety. She had a natural sense of empathy that extended beyond humans. Injured animals often found her tending to their wounds, and sickly plants seemed to revive under her touch. There was a harmony to her movements, a rhythm that mirrored the gentle waves of the river, and this rhythm became her signature, a silent testament to the bond she shared with nature and the unseen spirits that dwelled there. Yet, there was also an air of melancholy about her, a subtle recognition that not all would embrace her gifts with goodwill. She had glimpsed the envy lurking in some hearts, the whispers of discontent that threatened the peace of the village. Still, she did not waver, for she understood that her purpose was greater than petty resentment or fear. Her devotion to the river and its guardians, her unwavering kindness, and her profound intuition made her a force that would not easily be broken. As she walked along the banks, the water reflecting her image in fragmented, sparkling waves, it was clear to all who saw her that she was extraordinary. She was a girl of quiet strength, a beacon of light in the darkness, and a living testament to the harmony between human courage and spiritual guidance. It was only a matter of time before the envy of others would rise, testing her in ways that would challenge both her mortal body and her spiritual bond with the river. And yet, she remained steadfast, ready to face whatever trials lay ahead, trusting that the sacred river would always respond to her call and protect her in the face of danger. The envy that had been simmering in the village soon transformed into a dangerous resolve. Those who could not bear the girl's kindness, her quiet radiance, or the respect she commanded began to conspire in secret. They met under the cover of night, hidden in thickets along the riverbank or in the shadowed corners of empty huts, speaking in hushed tones so that their plans would remain unseen. Each whispered word dripped with malice, every glance carried the weight of greed and fear. They knew that to challenge her openly would bring shame upon themselves, for the villagers who admired her were numerous. But to act in secret, where the river's currents could claim her without witness, seemed both clever and safe to them. The leaders of this cruel plot were those closest to her, relatives who had once smiled at her as a sister, neighbors who had shared meals and laughter, but now their faces were twisted with jealousy. They recalled every small act of kindness she had performed and every gentle word she had spoken that made them feel small and inconsequential. Their minds, poisoned by envy, turned these memories into reasons for murder. "If she is gone, we will be free," one muttered, gripping a length of rope. "The river will swallow her and no one will know." Others nodded, visions of respect and power dancing in their minds. The plan, simple in its cruelty, was to wait until nightfall when the river was high and swift, and then carry her, unsuspecting, to the water's edge. They observed her routines carefully. They noted the hours she ventured to the river to speak with its spirits, the time she would gather water for her household, and the moments she strolled along the banks, her bare feet brushing the cool sand. Every movement was memorized, catalogued, and analyzed. Their strategy required patience and cunning. Any misstep could alert the girl or arouse suspicion among the villagers. To them, the risk was worth it. To her, the danger was invisible, as silent and hidden as the undercurrent of the river itself. The conspirators also devised subtle ways to manipulate her movements. A dropped basket here, a feigned stumble there, each small act would push her closer to the river without alarming her. They whispered rumors to guide her steps, suggesting she check something by the water or fetch a forgotten item. Every suggestion was laced with menace, designed to lure her into the trap without her realizing it. Their cunning lay not only in secrecy but in patience, allowing them to orchestrate the perfect moment for their cruel intentions. Even as they plotted, the river seemed to sense the brewing danger. Its waters, usually calm and reflective, became restless. Fish darted beneath the surface, unnerved by something unseen. The reeds along the banks whispered in the night wind, as if warning of the peril to come. Yet, the villagers ignored these subtle signs, confident in their plan and their ability to control the situation. Their eyes, fixed on their own desire for power and revenge, could not perceive the deeper forces at play. The leaders of the plot debated the best way to ensure she would not escape. Some suggested tying her hands and feet, others preferred a basket or sack to carry her to the river silently. One suggested a false pretext, a sudden call for help from a struggling animal, near the river, knowing she could not resist aiding it. Every option was carefully weighed, every possibility considered. They spoke of the river's depth, its current, and the likely paths it would carry her, imagining her lifeless form floating away, never to return. Each of them relished the thought of her absence, the imagined peace they would gain, and the newfound control over a village that had long admired her. But their planning was not without tension. Even among themselves, doubts arose. "What if she senses us?" one whispered, his voice trembling. Another scoffed, claiming that no human could defy the river in the way she had, that she was mortal and vulnerable like any other. Yet each night they reconvened, their resolve hardened, their jealousy burning hotter than any fear of failure. The plot, once a fleeting thought in envious minds, had become a tangible plan, one they were determined to see through to the bitter end. They timed their preparations meticulously, choosing a night when the moon would hide behind clouds and the village would sleep in silence. Lanterns were extinguished, doors quietly latched, and paths cleared for swift movement. Every step was orchestrated to avoid detection, every whisper measured to prevent escape. Even the river's own rhythms were studied. They knew the currents that could pull her under and those that could carry her downstream. Their cunning was precise, their malice calculated, and yet they were unaware that the forces they sought to exploit were alive, vigilant, and attuned to the injustice brewing in their hearts. As the hour approached, they gathered at the riverbank, hearts racing with anticipation and dread. Their hands trembled with excitement and fear, but no one faltered. They waited for her inevitable arrival, convinced that the girl of the riverbank, so gentle and kind, would not suspect the danger that surrounded her. In their minds, the trap was perfect, the plan flawless, and the river ready to claim her life. What they did not anticipate was the river itself, patient, ancient, and protective, which had long watched over the girl. The currents whispered warnings to unseen creatures, and the water pulsed with a quiet fury, preparing to defend one it had claimed as its own. And so, under the cloak of darkness, with the village asleep and the river restless, the conspirators prepared to execute their plot. Every element was in place: stealth, timing, and malicious intent. They imagined the moment when she would be pulled into the water, her struggles silenced, her gift extinguished. Yet, unbeknownst to them, their plans were about to meet forces far greater than their envy, a power woven into the river itself, ancient and merciless, ready to turn their treachery back upon them in ways they could never have imagined. As the girl lay on the riverbank, catching her breath, the night around her began to shift. The air thickened, charged with a subtle energy that made the leaves shiver and the water gleam unnaturally in the moonlight. The river, once gentle and protective, now stirred with a righteous fury, sensing the cruelty that had been inflicted upon her. Its currents churned, forming small whirlpools and eddies that sparkled with silver light, as if the spirits of the water themselves had awoken to punish the wrongdoers. The villagers who had sought to drown her now realized their mistake. Panic etched their faces as the river rose, not in floods or waves, but in deliberate, sentient motion. Streams split and twisted around them, preventing escape, guiding their every movement as if the water had eyes and intent. Branches, reeds, and stones moved subtly beneath the surface, creating obstacles and gentle barriers that trapped the greedy hands reaching for her. Their shouts, once filled with confidence and cruelty, faltered, turning into cries of confusion and fear as they sensed a power beyond their understanding. Beneath the surface, the spirits of the river swirled like silver fish, their forms shimmering with light that pierced the darkness. They were guardians, ancient and wise, each one representing a covenant with the land and its people. As the villagers stumbled and struggled, the spirits seemed to rise from the water, gliding over the currents, wrapping invisible arms around those who sought harm. Hands that had tried to seize her were suddenly held fast, unable to pull free. Feet that had stepped into the river slipped as if the river itself resisted them, pulling them deeper into its folds. The girl, though exhausted, watched in awe. She could feel the river communicating with her, a language of vibrations and subtle ripples that filled her chest with courage. The spirits whispered their judgment, making it clear that cruelty and envy were offenses not just against her, but against the sacred order of life that the river upheld. She felt her heart swell with both relief and empowerment. She was not alone, for the river's wrath was a shield and a weapon, acting on her behalf without her having to command it. Above the surface, the villagers' screams echoed across the night, blending with the croaks of frogs and the calls of nocturnal birds startled by the unnatural chaos. Every attempt they made to reach her was thwarted. A current would rise, twisting around their legs. A submerged root would entangle their ankles. The water would swell at strategic points to push them away. It was as if the river had learned their patterns, their intentions, and was executing justice with precise, relentless care. Some villagers fell to their knees, begging the river to spare them, realizing too late that the river punished not just through force but through the reflection of their own cruelty. The mystical creatures of the river began to appear more clearly. Small silver-scaled fish leapt from the water, forming arcs of light that dazzled and disoriented the assailants. Water birds, feathers glistening like molten silver, circled overhead, their cries echoing warnings. Tiny whirlpools spiraled around the culprits' feet, holding them suspended, immobile and terrified. Even the wind seemed to carry the river's will, tugging at their clothes and hair, pushing them further from the girl and closer to their inevitable reckoning. The river's wrath was not chaotic but purposeful. It struck only those who had intended harm, guiding them toward lessons they could not ignore. Their struggle was futile because the river understood the balance of justice. It spared the innocent, even those who had accidentally come too close, while punishing the envious and cruel with a calculated hand. As the villagers splashed and thrashed, their limbs and clothes glistening with the magical water, their faces became pale with fear, and their eyes widened as the truth became clear. They had challenged not only the girl but the sacred river itself. In that moment the girl rose to her feet, water dripping from her hair and clothes. She did not need to command the river, its currents moved in harmony with her presence as if recognizing her spirit. The silver light on the surface of the water mirrored her radiance, creating the illusion that she was standing upon liquid metal. Her calm gaze fell upon the villagers and they shuddered. They saw in her not just a human being, but a conduit of the river's judgment, an embodiment of the sacred force that had protected her and punished them. Some of the villagers tried to flee, but the river would not let them escape. The currents guided their movements back into the deeper water, making their flight impossible without facing the consequences of their actions. Screams and pleas mingled with the splashing of waves and the hum of water spirits, creating a symphony of reckoning. Each person who had attempted to harm her now found themselves completely at the mercy of the river's sentience, forced to acknowledge the error of their hearts and the harm they intended. Finally, as dawn began to approach, the river's wrath subsided, leaving the water calm and reflective once again. Those who had tried to drown her were exhausted, humbled, and forever marked by the power they had defied. The girl stepped forward, her feet barely disturbing the surface, and felt the river embrace her with a gentle current. The spirits whispered their approval, and the water shimmered with light, recognizing her as a true guardian, one chosen to walk between the human world and the sacred forces of nature. The village would remember this night forever. The river had spoken through her survival and its wrath, teaching a lesson that could not be forgotten. Cruelty and envy had been punished, kindness and courage had been honored, and the girl had emerged as a symbol of harmony between humans and the spirits that watched over them. Her bond with the river had been solidified, eternal and unbreakable, ensuring that justice would always have a voice, and the wicked would never forget the consequences of their actions. As dawn broke over the riverbank, a soft mist hovered over the water, diffusing the early sunlight into golden threads that danced upon the surface. The girl, though exhausted and drenched from her harrowing ordeal, felt a surge of energy coursing through her veins. The river had not only saved her from drowning but had infused her with a sense of purpose and power that she had never known before. Her breaths came in ragged gasps, but her spirit felt unshakable, as if the currents themselves had whispered ancient secrets into her soul. Lying on the soft grass at the river's edge, she reflected on the night's events. Fear had gripped her at first, but in that fear she had discovered resilience. The river's intervention had shown her that she was not alone. The forces of nature and the spirits that watched over the land were allies to those who acted with kindness and integrity. Every ripple, every swirl, had carried a message. Justice cannot be forced, but it cannot be denied. She realized that her connection to the water had deepened. The river no longer felt like a body of liquid passing through the land, but a living entity with memory, judgment, and compassion. As she stood, water dripping from her hair and clothes, she noticed the subtle changes within herself. Her senses were heightened. She could feel the pulse of the river beneath her feet, the gentle tug of its currents, and the whispers of its spirits that brushed against her mind like the softest wind. The touch of the water against her skin now felt like a conduit for energy, and she understood that this bond would remain forever. Her voice, when she spoke, carried a resonance that seemed to ripple through the surrounding earth, harmonizing with the flow of the river and even the songs of the birds awakening in the morning. The girl's reflection turned to the villagers who had attempted to drown her. She saw them now not as mere enemies but as people consumed by envy and fear. The river had punished them, yes, but she felt no desire to take personal vengeance. Instead, she resolved to use her newfound abilities to protect her community from cruelty and to ensure that those who sought to harm others would always face the natural balance of justice. Her anger had transformed into clarity, and her sorrow into purpose. She stepped carefully into the shallow edge of the river, allowing the water to envelop her feet. It welcomed her, wrapping around her ankles like a comforting embrace. She let herself float briefly, closing her eyes and letting the current guide her thoughts. In that moment she felt a deep understanding. The river was not just a protector but a teacher. It had shown her the duality of nature, its capacity to nurture and destroy, to heal and punish, and it had invited her to become a guardian of that wisdom. As she moved further into the water, she noticed that the river responded to her emotions. When fear arose, small waves curled protectively around her. When determination surged, the current seemed to pulse stronger, affirming her will. It was as though the river and she were in dialogue, each movement and sensation a sentence in a language older than the village, older than the mountains surrounding it. She realized she could sense danger long before it arrived, feel disturbances in the balance of the land, and perhaps influence the flow of events without uttering a single word. Emerging from the river fully, she stood on the bank with a sense of transformation that went beyond the physical. Her hair, damp and clinging to her face, glimmered with an almost ethereal sheen, and her eyes reflected a depth that seemed to hold the memories of the night's events and the wisdom of the river itself. She understood that survival was only the beginning, transformation was the true gift. She was no longer merely the girl from the village, she was a conduit of justice, a living reminder that those who act with cruelty would be answered by forces greater than themselves. Walking back toward her home, she noticed subtle signs of her change. Flowers that had been trampled during the night now leaned toward her path, as if bowing in recognition. Small animals peeked from the underbrush, unafraid, their eyes reflecting trust rather than fear. Even the wind seemed to follow her steps, carrying with it a fragrance of clean water and green reeds. She understood that she had been reborn in a way that would allow her to walk between the human world and the spiritual forces that governed it, a bridge of wisdom, courage, and intuition. By the time she reached the outskirts of her village, the villagers had gathered, unsure what to make of her sudden appearance. Some were awed, others fearful, but all sensed a shift in the natural order. She met their eyes steadily, not with vengeance but with calm authority. Her gaze carried a quiet message: the river had acted and justice had been served. Those who had tried to harm her were marked, and she would continue to walk with the river's guidance, ensuring balance and fairness for those who sought peace. In the days that followed, the girl embraced her new role. She helped those in need, guided those lost, and protected the sacred river that had saved her life. She often returned to its banks, listening to its whispers, learning its moods, and strengthening the bond that had saved her. Every gesture of kindness, every act of courage, became intertwined with the river's power, allowing her to navigate challenges with wisdom beyond her years. Her survival was more than a miracle, it was a transformation that connected her to forces larger than herself. The girl had become a guardian, a symbol of resilience, and a living testament to the power of the river and the spirits that dwelled within it. She walked forward with confidence, ready to face any future trials, carrying with her the knowledge that true strength comes not from vengeance, but from the courage to endure, the wisdom to understand, and the compassion to act with justice. After surviving the river's wrath, the girl knew that her ordeal had not ended, it had only begun. While the immediate threat of her enemy's cruelty had been thwarted by the river, the forces aligned against justice were still present in the village and beyond. To protect herself, the sacred river, and her people, she needed allies. Those who would understand the balance of nature, who would respect the spirits, and who would stand against cruelty. Her journey to gather them would test her resolve, her wisdom, and her courage. She first returned to the village, walking through narrow paths bordered by reeds and wildflowers, now blooming with the energy the river had imparted to her. The villagers, initially wary of her survival, watched in awe as she approached. Her presence commanded quiet attention. She knew that not everyone would support her. Fear and envy still lingered in hearts hardened by superstition or self-interest. So, she spoke softly at first, calling upon those who had always respected the river and its ways. Elderly women who had tended the sacred waters for decades responded first. They joined her willingly, their trust born of shared reverence for the spirits. Next, she sought the spirits themselves. Deep in the forest bordering the river, she knelt at a clearing where moonlight spilled like silver over the ground. She whispered prayers and offerings into the flowing wind, and soon she felt the presence of unseen beings. Wisps of light coalesced into shapes, water spirits who shimmered like liquid glass, woodland entities with eyes that glowed softly in the dark, and small creatures that had long observed the village from hidden corners. At first, some of the spirits tested her, sending illusions and minor disturbances to see if her resolve would falter. She walked through walls of fog and swirling leaves without fear, answering each trial with patience and clarity. Her sincerity, courage, and compassion drew them closer, binding them to her cause. The girl also encountered animals along the way, drawn by the magic of the river. Birds with iridescent feathers perched nearby, watching her every movement with keen intelligence. Small mammals emerged from burrows, stepping cautiously yet confidently near her feet. Even larger creatures, deer, wildcats, and the occasional river otter, sensed her presence as one of protection, not harm. Each encounter tested her ability to communicate with beings not bound by human language. She learned to move in harmony with them, understanding that leadership required listening as much as commanding. These animals would become her eyes, ears, and guides through dangerous terrain, ready to alert her of threats or help in times of need. Along her journey, she encountered villagers who were not easily persuaded. Some remained fearful of her connection to the river, believing that her survival had cursed her. Others were skeptical of her intentions, suspecting that she sought power or vengeance. Each challenge forced her to demonstrate patience, empathy, and clarity of purpose. She did not use intimidation or threats. Instead, she shared stories of the river's protection, her near-death experience, and the importance of justice and balance. Slowly, fear gave way to trust, and those who had doubted her began to recognize the girl as a conduit of both wisdom and power. The journey was not without danger. Envious villagers who had attempted to drown her continued to lurk in the shadows, attempting to intercept her gatherings. At one point, she was confronted by a group of men who demanded she return to the village and face punishment. Calmly, she invoked the river's protection, calling upon its currents and her allies in the forest. Vines rose from the ground, forming barriers that held her assailants at bay. Birds swooped to distract them, and the river's waters churned as if alive, sending a warning in the form of a sudden flood in nearby channels. The attackers, unnerved and convinced of the girl's connection to forces beyond their understanding, retreated. Her resolve strengthened. She knew that true allies would stand by her, and true enemies would reveal themselves through their own fear and malice. By the time she had traveled from the riverbank to the far edges of the village and surrounding forests, she had amassed a coalition of allies unlike any the region had seen. Elders and villagers who respected the spirits, forest and river creatures, and benevolent spirits themselves now answered her call. Each ally brought unique skills, knowledge, and insight, from tracking and scouting to communicating with other unseen forces of the natural world. They became a living testament to the girl's ability to unify disparate beings, human and non-human, through respect, courage, and shared purpose. The suspense and tension of gathering allies also strengthened the girl internally. She learned to remain patient when negotiations faltered, creative when challenges arose, and unwavering when fear threatened to sway others. Every successful alliance reinforced her sense of responsibility, reminding her that power without wisdom and compassion could easily corrupt. She understood that the river's gift was not only her survival but also the ability to act as a bridge between worlds, uniting the human community and the spirits that protected it. As night fell over the village and surrounding lands, the girl stood on a hill overlooking her newfound coalition. The fireflies blinked in rhythm with the river's flow below, and the animals and spirits gathered quietly at her feet. She felt a profound connection to all that she had brought together. Each being, each ally reflected her courage, determination, and respect for the balance of nature. Though the path ahead remained uncertain, she was no longer alone. Together they would face the consequences of envy, injustice, and cruelty, guided by the wisdom of the river and the strength of their unified purpose. In the gathering of allies, the girl had not only secured support for the challenges to come but had transformed herself into a true leader. She learned that courage was not measured by survival alone but by the ability to inspire trust, foster unity, and command respect across species, both seen and unseen. With the village, forest, and river now aligned with her, she was ready to confront those who sought to harm her and uphold the balance of justice. After gathering her allies, the girl retreated to a secluded grove by the sacred river, where moonlight danced across the water and the whispers of ancient spirits filled the air. Here she could think without interruption, plan without distraction, and align the energies of the land, the animals, and the unseen beings who now stood with her. She knew that simple anger would not suffice. Her enemies were cunning, their cruelty deeply rooted in jealousy and fear. Her strategy needed to be equally clever, combining her wits with the supernatural aid she had earned through her ordeal. She began by studying her village from the riverbank, observing the daily routines of those who had tried to drown her. Every patrol, every ritual, every whispered plot became part of her map. She marked their homes, noting which families had been most vocal in their envy, which guards were most easily swayed, and which elders had turned a blind eye to wrongdoing. Her knowledge of the terrain, combined with the guidance of the forest spirits, gave her insights that no ordinary human could possess. Streams and hidden paths that seemed ordinary to the villagers now became secret avenues for movement, communication, and potential surprise. The girl then focused on the mystical side of her plan. She called upon the river, whose currents had once saved her life, and asked it to lend her strength in precise, controlled ways. The river agreed, murmuring in ripples and eddies, revealing hidden channels and suggesting methods for subtle, yet undeniable, intervention. Water sprites glided along the surface, ready to respond to her signals, while forest spirits pledged to observe and, if necessary, nudge events toward justice. She even spoke to the animals that had joined her, assigning roles for reconnaissance, distraction, and guidance. Birds would relay messages, nocturnal creatures would shadow enemies, and the river's fish would alert her to movements along the waterway. Every ally had a part to play, and each part was crucial. Her strategy was more than direct confrontation. It was a careful orchestration of fear, accountability, and revelation. She did not wish to act recklessly. Her enemies needed to see the consequences of their cruelty unfold, to understand that their malice had summoned forces far beyond their control. She planned small, deliberate interventions. A sudden swell in the river near a greedy villager's home, a mysterious fog that delayed the conspirators' movements, whispers in the night that hinted at unseen eyes watching every action. Each act was subtle, enough to unsettle, but not so violent as to cause unnecessary harm to innocents. She wanted justice, not chaos. The girl also considered timing. She waited for moments when her enemies would be most vulnerable, when they were separated, arrogant in their perceived control, or engaged in schemes against her or the village. These windows of opportunity were rare and required patience. She knew the river and forest would not allow haste. Rushing would weaken her strategy and risk alerting the wrong people. Nights of observation and planning became lessons in discipline, and she grew increasingly attuned to the natural rhythm of the land. Even the wind, carrying scents and sounds, became a tool she learned to read. Foreshadowing the consequences for her enemies, she began leaving subtle signs. Carvings along trees, stones arranged in patterns near their homes, and fleeting reflections in water that suggested the presence of powers beyond comprehension. Some villagers began to whisper, noticing strange events around them. Fish leaping unusually, shadows moving without wind, and rivers behaving unpredictably. Fear began to creep into the hearts of those who had plotted against her, though they did not yet know the source. The girl's plan relied on this creeping unease, for fear can weaken resolve and invite mistakes, making it easier for justice to unfold. Her plan was layered, combining direct supernatural action with psychological strategy. She designed scenarios in which the guilty would be confronted with the truth of their deeds. A villager who had attempted to betray her might find a river channel altered, isolating him. An envious relative could hear whispers from the forest spirits reminding them of their cruelty. The girl intended to ensure that each consequence was proportional, symbolic, and instructive. Her goal was not only retribution but also teaching the villagers to respect the balance between humans and the spirits, between envy and humility. As she finalized her strategy, she reflected on her own role. She would not act as a tyrant or seek vengeance for its own sake. Her actions would be guided by the spirits, by the river, and by the principles of justice that had been instilled in her since birth. She felt the weight of responsibility but also a deep clarity. Every ally, every mystical force, every detail of timing and placement had to be perfectly aligned. The plan required courage, intelligence, and unwavering trust in the powers she had earned. When the night of retribution approached, she stood by the riverbank, the moon casting silver reflections on the water's surface. The allies were ready. Spirits glimmered in the shadows, animals watched attentively, and the river itself seemed to pulse with anticipation. The girl knew that when the moment arrived, the consequences of envy, greed, and cruelty would be made manifest. The plotters of her death would face forces they could neither control nor escape, and justice, guided by the wisdom of the river and the forest, would prevail. Her plan was complete, a blend of cunning and supernatural intervention, foresight and restraint, mercy and consequence. In this careful orchestration, the girl embodied patience and intelligence. She did not rush, she did not strike without cause. Each step, each act was part of a greater design. Her enemy's downfall would be inevitable, yet precise, and the village would witness the balance restored. This was the true power she had gained from her survival. Not only the gift of life but the ability to command justice through wisdom, courage, and connection to forces far greater than any mortal reckoning. The girl approached the village at dawn, the first light glinting off the river and casting long shadows across the fields. Her allies followed in silence. Animals moved cautiously along the edges of the trees, spirits whispered through the leaves, and water from the river seemed to ripple and shimmer unnaturally, as if anticipating the moment of reckoning. The air itself carried tension, thick and electric, hinting at the supernatural forces poised to intervene. Villagers stirring in the early morning were the first to sense that something extraordinary was approaching. A chill ran down their spines, though the sun had yet to fully rise. As she entered the heart of the village, the envious relatives and conspirators began to notice disturbances. Fish in nearby streams leapt unusually high, and the wind carried faint echoes of voices not of this world. Animals paused mid-step and stared as if recognizing a power beyond comprehension. The girl moved with a calm, deliberate stride, her eyes focused and unwavering. Each step was in rhythm with the river's pulse, and the forest spirits mirrored her movements from the shadows, their silent presence an unspoken warning to those who had plotted against her. When the first of the betrayers spotted her, their fear was immediate and unmistakable. Their whispers became frantic as they tried to comprehend what they were seeing. The girl's return was not just physical, it carried with it the weight of mystical forces they had ignored, underestimated, or mocked. The river had taught her patience and strategy, and now she embodied the culmination of that lesson. Power tempered with focus, intelligence guided by supernatural insight. The initial confrontation began with subtle manifestations of her allies' power. Streams shifted, forming barriers that hemmed in the guilty, while wind gusts carried whispers that revealed secrets of past betrayals. Birds circled overhead, squawking alarms that unnerved the conspirators. Even the trees seemed to lean toward the girl, their branches curling as if in silent support. The villagers who had not plotted against her watched in awe, unsure whether to flee or bear witness to the unfolding justice. Dialogue broke the tense silence. The girl's voice, calm yet resonant, carried clearly over the gathering. "Do you remember the river?" she asked, addressing the leaders of the plot. "Do you remember the fear you tried to instill in me? You sought to drown my life, my spirit, my voice. Yet here I stand, guided by forces you cannot see and cannot command." Her words carried weight, amplified by the reverberations of spirits who had heard her call in the hills and responded. The conspirators attempted to flee, but each step they took seemed countered by the land itself. The river's currents shifted subtly, directing them toward areas where her allies, both natural and mystical, were positioned. Trees bent to block escape routes and animal tracks misled them, sowing confusion and panic. The girl remained composed, walking steadily toward them, her presence radiating authority and inevitability. The air shimmered around her, the supernatural aura growing stronger with every measured step. The tension escalated as the supernatural elements became more overt. Water from the river rose in glistening arcs, not harming the innocent but forming walls and restraints around those who had sought her death. Leaves glowed faintly with an inner light, creating patterns that revealed the guilt of those standing before her. Whispered voices, soft yet unmistakable, spoke of betrayal, cruelty, and envy, echoing in the ears of the guilty. The girl's calm demeanor contrasted with the mounting panic around her, emphasizing the contrast between virtue and malice. The confrontation turned physical in subtle, symbolic ways. Streams shifted to form barriers, separating enemies from allies. Rocks moved as if guided by invisible hands, nudging the conspirators into positions where they could be confronted directly without harm to innocents. The river itself seemed to pulse in time with the girl's heartbeat, the water's movement echoing the rhythm of her resolve. Each conspirator faced a moment of realization, understanding that the powers protecting her were both just and inescapable. Dialogue and action intertwined as the girl addressed each betrayer individually. "You thought your jealousy stronger than my spirit," she said to one. "But it is your cruelty that binds you, not me." Another trembled as the river swirled near his feet, water forming intricate luminous patterns that traced his prior schemes. "See the truth of your actions," she intoned, her voice carrying authority beyond mortal reach. The supernatural forces did not strike without reason. They revealed, restrained, and illuminated the consequences of every choice. By the climax of the confrontation, the village itself seemed to respond. Trees creaked as though whispering counsel, streams shimmered with ethereal light, and the wind carried warnings that made fleeing impossible. Those who had sought to harm her were forced to witness not only the girl's survival but the undeniable presence of justice, mediated through her connection to the river and allied spirits. Panic, fear, and awe intermingled on their faces as the reality of their misdeeds sank in. The girl finally stopped at the center of the village, the river flowing nearby like a silent guardian. Her allies, the mystical creatures, animals, and natural elements, formed a subtle perimeter showing strength without unnecessary violence. Her gaze swept across those who had wronged her, and for a moment, the village held its breath. The confrontation was complete. The guilty could neither escape nor deny the justice prepared for them, while the innocent observed a demonstration of power, patience, and supernatural wisdom. In the aftermath of the confrontation, the girl stood as a figure of serene authority. The river calmed and the mystical energies receded slightly, leaving only a sense of awe and inevitability. The villagers realized that her return was more than a personal triumph. It was a restoration of balance, a reminder that cruelty and envy carry consequences beyond human control. The girl had confronted her betrayers not with uncontrolled wrath but with carefully measured strategy, aided by the spirits and elements she had earned as allies. After the river had claimed justice, the girl felt a deep transformation take root within her. Her ordeal had changed not only her body but her spirit, sharpening her intuition and expanding her awareness of the forces that governed life and nature. The currents, which had once surged to protect her, now whispered constantly to her, revealing hidden paths through the forest, secret streams that healed, and the subtle rhythms of the earth that pulsed beneath the village. Every breeze, every rustle of leaves, every ripple of the river carried guidance, teaching her to listen and respond with a calm certainty that no ordinary mortal could possess. She felt the river's essence infused into her being, a bond of protection and purpose that would never break. Her physical presence remained unassuming, but those who encountered her could sense the quiet authority she exuded. Animals approached her without fear, recognizing her as a force aligned with the natural world. Villagers who had once doubted or envied her watched her with newfound reverence, drawn to her calm yet commanding aura. Even the weather seemed to respond. Clouds would gather and part at her movement, rain would fall precisely where needed to nourish crops or cleanse the land, and sunlight would warm those who approached with pure intent. It was as if the very world had conspired to mark her as a guardian, a protector not only of herself but of the balance and justice she had fought so fiercely to uphold. Her mystical gifts extended beyond physical manifestations. She could sense the intentions of those around her, distinguishing between honesty and malice with an almost preternatural clarity. She could feel the emotional tides of the village, the subtle swell of fear, envy, or compassion, and respond in ways that healed conflicts before they could erupt. Her presence became a stabilizing force in the community. Disputes that might have once escalated into violence were quelled by her quiet interventions, her wisdom radiating through simple gestures or words carefully chosen. Her connection to the river, to the forest, and to the unseen spirits became a source of counsel for the villagers, who began to consult her for guidance on matters both mundane and profound. Stories of her survival and the river's wrath spread far beyond the village. Travelers and neighboring communities carried tales of a girl who had defied mortal cruelty, whose courage had drawn the protection of the elements, and whose voice had become a bridge between the human and the supernatural. The legend took on a life of its own, inspiring songs, poems, and warnings passed from parent to child. Mothers would caution their children not to act with envy or cruelty, invoking her name as a symbol of the consequences that awaited those who harmed others. Bards sang of her courage, and storytellers spoke of the silver currents that had punished injustice, reminding all who listened that morality and compassion were forces as real and potent as the river itself. As the years passed, she assumed the role of protector with grace and diligence. She would patrol the riverbanks, ensuring that the water remained pure and that the land was treated with respect. She healed those who sought her guidance and mediated disputes with impartiality, often invoking the memory of the river's judgment to remind villagers of the value of integrity and fairness. Her home, once a simple dwelling near the river, became a sanctuary for those in need, a place where the weary could find rest and the troubled could seek counsel. Even the trees and animals seemed to acknowledge her authority, bowing subtly as she passed, recognizing her as an intermediary between the human world and the elemental forces that had chosen to protect her. Yet, despite her elevated status, she remained humble. She never sought power for its own sake, understanding that her gifts were responsibilities rather than privileges. She spent time teaching the young, sharing lessons about empathy, courage, and respect for all living things. She emphasized that the river's protection had not been a reward for strength alone but a response to her steadfast commitment to justice and compassion. Those who approached her learned to value inner virtue over outward appearance, kindness over cruelty, and patience over impulsive action. Her life became a model for ethical living, a testament to the potential that resides in those who act with moral clarity even in the face of danger. Over time, the legend of the girl of the riverbank became inseparable from the village itself. Travelers came to witness the sacred river, to hear tales from those who had seen her, and to learn from the land that had been shaped by her presence. The community prospered, united under shared respect for her example and the unseen powers that had intervened on her behalf. Even when she was no longer seen daily, her influence lingered. The river flowed more vibrantly, the crops grew richer, and the villagers lived with a heightened sense of ethical consciousness, forever guided by the memory of her courage and the supernatural justice that had marked her journey. In every corner of the village, the girl's story served as a cautionary yet inspiring tale. Children grew up hearing how cruelty and envy had been punished by forces beyond human reckoning, and how mercy and moral courage had earned blessings beyond imagining. The silver currents that had defended her were said to still respond to her voice, her prayers, and her presence, reinforcing the belief that true justice aligns the natural and human worlds. Her legacy was not only in the protection she offered in her lifetime but in the enduring respect for the sacred, the moral, and the mystical that she instilled in the hearts of all who came after. Thus, she became more than a survivor. She became a symbol, a guardian, and a living legend. The river and its currents were no longer just water. They were an extension of her will, a reminder of the balance between justice and mercy, and a warning to those who would harm others. Her transformation was complete. From a young girl of quiet strength to a luminous protector whose legacy would echo across generations, blending the mortal and mystical into a single, enduring story of courage, compassion, and unwavering moral authority.